everybody. This hangout on air is live. Tyler Cartwright, the greatest keto group on Facebook, is an admin. He's a certified expert, in my opinion. This dude is very well versed in the world of ketogenic diets. And he's been so kind as to come and share his story with me and with all of you. So we're live here with Tyler. Tyler, where are you at right now, man?
I am sitting just outside of Nashville, Tennessee. So a little bitty town about 20 miles to the southeast side of Nashville. And actually in my office, I guess, to be more specific.
Awesome. Awesome. So the viewers are rolling in. You guys, if you've got comments or questions, you must be, first of all, signed in to either YouTube or Google+. Go ahead and put your comments and questions over here on the right-hand side. And if you can, if we've got any audio issues, let us know, and I can adjust the audio levels of either myself or Tyler. So, yeah, if there's audio issues, let me know. Include you just hating the sound of my voice. Okay. So Tyler, you've lost over 288 pounds now. And that's, I mean, I just want to reiterate that Tyler has lost over 288 pounds using a ketogenic diet and lifestyle changes. He's got one of the most inspiring photos that I've ever seen. I'm going to pull up this photo right now. I'm going to actually show you guys a few photos of Tyler from his past and Tyler from the ghost of Christmas past and the ghost of Christmas present, I guess, in honor of the holidays. And I've got my Ketogains shirt on today, guys. I don't know if you can even see it because of the lighting. Ketogains was sweet enough to send me this shirt. I love it. I don't wear it enough because it says my name on and something I don't know about with wearing a shirt with my name on it all the time. Feels a bit funny, but I love this shirt. Fits great. And I love Ketogains. You guys are always awesome. I've talked to Luis before Ketogains, and now I'm here with Tyler. Tyler's kind of the other half of Ketogains. I see him as kind of the heart and soul behind it. This dude puts so much love, so much energy into helping people, into exploring the science of ketosis, and his story is truly inspirational. So we're going to get into all this. First things first, I want to pull up some of these pictures so you guys can see what's going on here. All right, let's see. Starting the screen share. Whoa. That
was actually kind of cool.
That's pretty crazy. All right, turn off screen share. Stop screen share because that was not working. All right, I'm going to try a different version of screen share. Let's see. Here it is. Photos. All right. Well, I'm not sure if this is quite working. Oh, no, it isn't? Yeah. Did you guys see this picture?
Well,
see that picture I just pulled up?
It's loading. Something's loading.
Okay. Can you see it?
I can see your mouse moving if that counts.
That doesn't count. I'm pulling up the picture and it's only showing. Okay. Well, that's so lame. I'm sorry, guys. Technical difficulties are keeping me from properly sharing my screen. And I've ended screen share. Anyways, Tyler's got a picture. A before and after picture. That's so amazing. You could probably find it on the Ketogains group. So if you look up on Facebook, there's a group called Ketogains. These guys know what they're doing. They know what they're talking about. They care about helping people, and they help a lot of people. They do a lot of boot camps as well. For those of you looking to get whipped up into shape by Luis Villasenor and Tyler and the other trainers from Ketogains. Now, Tyler's got a picture of him in his old pants. And it's not just him in his old pants. It's him and his wife standing in a pair of his pants that he was wearing how long ago, Tyler?
About 10 years ago now. Those are actually, the funny thing is everybody, I guess because I put myself out there and say, hey, this is possible. My wife's actually lost 126 pounds herself. So, I mean, between the two of us, we're, well past the 400-pound mark between the two of us. And so she was a US size 26 down to around an 8'10" now, and herself. So yeah, but yeah, that's the two of us, one in each leg, and probably could have shoved the kid in between us if we had tried real hard, but we were about to tip over, and I was pretty sure crushing a child would get me in a lot of trouble with the authorities. So
They might not like that.
they were frowning.
So were you 500 pounds? Did you break that 500 mark before you started losing body fat?
505.6 according to the loading scale on the back of my doctor's office. Yes.
Okay. And so when you went to the doctor's office, that scale that they've got, the nice scales, the medical scale, the exact scale, you were too heavy for that one?
It went up to 450 pounds, I think. And the first time I went in, I was 444, and then went down to 415. Then I went back a few months later because I couldn't stay awake for more than about half an hour to an hour at a time. And yeah, the scale was erroring out. And so they happened to have a loading scale in the back. And so they took me back there, and that was the closest we got, was 505.6.
So you were only able to stay awake for 30 minutes to an hour at a time. What would happen?
I'd be in conversation, I'd be driving, I'd be doing whatever. And if I wasn't constantly eating or drinking something laden with sugar, I would just fall asleep. And it wasn't the pleasant dreams kind of fall asleep. It was the sugar crash kind of fall asleep, right? It was the not so good scenario.
So you were like full blown diabetic and relatively immobile.
I was, whether I could move or not was immaterial to whether I did move. And the answer was no, I didn't move. And yeah, with respect to being, diabetic, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, no question about it. I all the check marks and all the boxes were there.
So were you like, how did it get to that point? How did it start, man? Because it's like, obviously, you didn't lose 288 pounds overnight, but you also probably didn't gain that 505 pounds overnight. So let's kind of, and I know it can be probably annoying to look back so much when you've got so much that's amazing, and it might even be a little bit, painful to think about these things. But what was going on in your life that this was kind of allowed to happen? I mean, were you was it just because of naughty carbohydrates, and was it the insulin?
So here would be my take. I said this before, and I kind of caught some flack for it, but you'll see how much I care about that, because I'm going to say it again. Nobody weighs 500 pounds because they're emotionally and physically healthy. That's just a matter of fact. Unless you are an active sumo wrestler, you don't need to weigh that much weight, or an elephant. And I'm just being honest here. I mean, and so there were a lot of things that were screwed up. My wife and I both sort of had some issues and baggage that when you put them together, it's sort of like, I'll screw it up, but like the whole recipe, like bleach and ammonia, you put it together and it forms, whatever, napalm or whatever, I don't know. It becomes a really noxious
I think
gas.
That's gasoline and styrofoam, according to my hillbilly cousins.
There you go. You put those two things together and they just create this volatile situation. So I think between her desire to see me happy and knowing that I grew up around food and loved to cook and eat, and and honestly, and I talked about this before, we connected a lot while eating. Over meals, we would sit and have meaningful conversation. So when the dysfunction started to kind of take over some of that, and the relationship in general, where did we go? We went to the place where we connected. Well, the place we connected was food. So, for both of us, it became a really unhealthy thing. For me, I think it's also, there was a certain amount of punishment for, look, I tend to be the kind of person who doesn't forget much of anything, good or bad. And it's kind of a blessing and a curse. I remember things that other people don't, but I remember things that other people don't. And so I think it's one of those weird situations where there was almost like this form of, I don't deserve to look the way I want to look. I don't deserve that, coupled with this hyper competitive sort of weird personal vendetta that I had going on. If I ate 7 pieces of pizza today, maybe I could eat 9. How much could I really eat? You know, and I know that sounds insane, but legitimate conversations that were going through my head. You know, and you couple that with that level of desperation and dysfunction where you're trying to figure out how to put the pieces back together of a marriage that was kind of eroding, for lack of a better term, from the sheer weight. It's a tough thing to try and put together, right? I mean, it's a very difficult, you know, thing. But, you know, in addition, nobody also gets to that kind of weight because of one thing. And one of the things that drives me nuts, if you watch like The Biggest Loser and these shows, is everyone tries to distill it down to like this one thing. You know, oh, I'm this, or oh, somebody treated me mean, or a coach said something harsh to me, or whatever. And it's like, and those things hurt, but that one thing is not the reason you got obese. You know,
Yeah, it seems like sometimes
it's like a cascade.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's so poignant the way you just described this. It's almost I think no matter what we're dealing with, a lot of the times we can. Bit of an echo. Are you hearing that? Oh, that's better now. It stopped.
Okay.
It stopped when I slowed down my voice. Strange. It seems like, and I mean, this is something that I think we all struggle with and we can all relate to. Whenever we're going through like a healing crisis, and whether that healing crisis be physical, needing to lose weight, or digestive issues that have to do with stress, or bearing mental and emotional burden that we're carrying. The first thing that a lot of us try and do is find a single wound to pick at and hyper focus on that thing and kind of project a lot of the issues and of what's going on into this one little facet. And what I love about when you actually share your struggle is you're so ready to discuss the reality behind it and talk about how it's not just this one thing. You know, I mean, you had these emotional issues going on. The food became a proxy for the release of whatever internal tensions were there, and compounding that with relationship issues with the wife, and you guys both just feeding into this vicious cycle. It's near like we can't just we could spend hours and hours looking at the situation, looking at, you know, your past history. But I mean, I guess to boil it down, what you're saying is there's no one reason. It's not just the Nazi insulin. It's not just, oh, well, the carbs made me fat and the government said that the carbs are good, so it's the system's fault. I mean, things. And that taking responsibility aspect of it seems like a major aspect in people's lives. When people are really trying to change, when people are really trying to make long-term lifestyle changes, taking responsibility seems like the common thread and the common turning point where people see when it all changed. So you know, instead of looking back at all the pain and all the heaviness, because of course that's there, and anybody who's been vastly overweight or sick, depressed, they understand it. And I mean, that's pretty much everybody in the world, because we all deal with these human issues at one level or another, to some degree of intensity or another. But what was the turning point for you when it just became, man, like this is too much? And when did you start to take responsibility? And it obviously propelled you to where you're at now, where you're able to poignantly and intelligently articulate these ideas. What was that turning point for you?
So, yeah, it's hard again to say that it's one thing. You know, my mother had written me a letter that basically said, you know, I don't want to die. I don't want to bury my son before I die. You know, you're going to kill yourself. And that's, I mean, she was nicer about it than I'm being in describing it, but that's a pretty close approximation of what was being said. You know, there were several things that had happened, you know, having to, and I've written about this some at ketogains.com, but having to walk into, you know, to the dealership where I just bought my new vehicle and ask for seatbelt extenders, you know, people literally hitting the button and the airplane when I got on the airplane and being asked to move to a different seat when they saw me slowing down before I even sat down. I mean, those are things that say to you, hey, it's gotten a little too far, right? I mean, it had gotten much too far, but, you know, in my head, I was still an athlete. I was just, you know, chunky. And, you know, and then I think the second side of things was seeing all the things that Jamie wanted to do, my wife, you know, was wanting to do, you know, the travel, the children, the things that I simply couldn't do. I couldn't provide for. There was just no opportunity to do that. So, you know, some of it was realizing that what I was doing to myself was having some effect on other people. Some of it was just realizing how I was alive but not alive. And I think some of it was just this recognition that you know, that I was leaving a legacy that I didn't want to leave for anyone that, you know, friends, family, eventually children, whatever, right? You know, I don't want to leave a legacy that says that I was a victim of genetics or that I was somebody who couldn't stand up and fight the demons in his own life or whatever else, right? You know, so again, in the same way that it wasn't one thing that necessarily was the cascade that started the ball rolling down the hill, it wasn't necessarily one thing that stopped it and moved it the other direction. But, you know, there were just those types of experiences that were all, in retrospect, really big red flags that said, hey, I need to step back and reevaluate not dying.
Wow. So it got to the point where you kind of saw it as literally a life or death situation.
Yeah. I mean, you know, my dad and my wife both, we were, let's see, was it my dad's got a small farm and we hunt pretty regularly up there. And he made the comment one time that he laid and listened to me breathe in the bedroom, you know, when I was at my heaviest. And he said, you know, you literally you would take a breath, wait about 60 or 70 seconds, gasp, cough, breathe again, start the cycle all over again. And, you know, the snoring had gotten so bad that my wife could barely sleep. I mean, we were both just miserable and uncomfortable. And so there were just, you know, literally, when you say life and death, I'm sure I was, you know, probably a year to 18 months away from having something serious to happen, for sure, because there was no stopping that movement.
Yeah. So when you did visit the doctor, like did you have any overt blatant health problems, or was the doctor kind of just this thing where it's like why even bother, you know?
My doctor said, look, I'm not even going to take your blood because I know what it's going to say. You know, your blood is syrup at this point. So he said, look, I know what the results are going to be, and I would rather you go and try and lose some weight and see if you can get healthy before I do this, because I don't want to have to write down what I have to write down if I officially diagnose you with what I know I have to diagnose you with. So please go do something. And he said, and the biggest problem you've got is, he said, you've got all these latent issues, but, you know, you're healthy as a horse. The problem is you're just as big as one. And, you know, in retrospect, I kind of chuckle at it now, but it kind of hit hard, you know, at the time, because it was like, I was sitting there doing the math. I was like, 500 pounds. That's like half a horse, you know, anyway. And so,
like a pony, right?
Yeah,
Pony
it's like a little Shetland pony or something. And so, you know, it was hard to hear, but, you know, with the exception of, you know, inflammatory stuff and, you know, and blood pressure and, you know, pulse rate from being really out of CV shape or whatever, and those sorts of things. I mean, I didn't have fatty liver. Triglycerides weren't necessarily a problem. There were, I mean, all the things that you would expect somebody that obese to have, I didn't. Lungs were in fairly good health. I didn't have enlarged heart. I was fortunate, I think, in that I was an athlete early in my life, so that there was some base of muscle and some base of strength and endurance and those kinds of things that really were able to help me to kind of come back from the edge maybe a little bit more easily than some of the other folks that have had, you know, the blessing and the opportunity to help kind of guide through this process.
Yeah. Wow. So I'm looking at some of the comments right now. Janet says, "Stop rocking. You're making me dizzy." say rock on, Tyler. If you like to rock, rock on.
Get better.
There you go. Now I'm just gonna shake around, maybe Janet.
There you go. Come on, that Ecuadorian internet's throwing me off there now. You're all pixelated.
Oh man, that's a shame. Can you guys hear me okay though? Is my audio clear?
I'm good on my end for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad it's prioritizing audio because that's probably what's more important. Please excuse my poor internet connection, guys. I have logged a formal complaint. Even before I started this, I preemptively complained to my internet service provider that it was too slow. So maybe they'll give me a boost, or maybe I'll stay pixelated. But you know, it is what it is. So yeah, man. I mean that's pretty interesting that the despite being the size of a horse, you were still in relatively decent health as far as heart health and everything goes. Now, so you decided it's time to change. Responsibility kicked in. Sounds like there was probably some major introspection. And I mean, was it hard? Was it overwhelming making the decision to change your life? I mean, after years of compounding these habits within a relationship that at the time, it sounds like there was maybe a very distorted version of love going on there, and a lot of pain in between you guys. So what was that process like of actually fully committing to doing what you did and dropping, along with your wife who lost 120 pounds, dropping those 288 pounds using diet and lifestyle changes and getting your health and your life back together? Was it overwhelming, and what was that process like mentally and emotionally and spiritually, however you want to log it?
So let me start with like the relationship side of things. So it's funny. Like Drew Manning had me on his podcast, and I was talking about this very thing. I said, the people that you expect to be like high-fiving you, and I laugh. They use like the Calvin's got a job, analogy. Everybody's giving him five and fist bumping him along the way. That really didn't happen. Because, in looking back on it now, I mean, like I said before, my wife and I connected over food. And now all of a sudden I'm saying, I'll go with you to the restaurant, but I can't eat.
Did she take it personally?
It was a very, very personal thing. And I get that now. At the time, there was a part of me that just said, well, why can't you rally behind me making this change? And the answer is because she had seen me and other members of her family and other people, and her friends and whatever, try and make changes that never really lasted either. And so it felt almost like I was withholding from her in that respect. And so, definitely that was a challenge. There were people, my family that were encouraging, but also very, very, I think, nervous a little bit about the approach that I was taking. What about all the fat? What about the sodium? What about the, fill in the blank other stuff, right? And then I think, on a personal level, we have, I gotta say this. So I'm a nerd at heart. I design networks for a living for forever. And one of the things that, you learn to deal with is that we live in a digital society, right? Everything's a 0 or a 1 when it goes across on across glass. It's either on or off. And so people tend to look, and they don't ask for before and during photos. They ask for before and after pictures. They want to see everything from the perspective of, like, what did you look like before versus what did you look like now? And I think that in the process of change, man, I've failed more times than most people have ever started. Being at this a decade, I have figured out.
You mean it wasn't just like a straight shot, 500 pounds to 210 pounds, a few weeks, just a buckling down white knuckle, and it was done? It wasn't that easy?
It wasn't. It's crazy. No, it's funny in that people have that perspective. It's like, I'm going to try hard, and if hard doesn't work, I'm going to try harder. And there is a certain amount of trying hard that has to be done, and something that I had to learn, that sometimes saying no to myself was the most difficult thing I was ever going to have to do. But on the other side of the coin, there's also reminding yourself that in order to say yes to yourself in other areas, you have to say no to yourself in some of these others. And that was a big thing for me because, my career at the time was paying pretty well. We lived pretty reasonably. And so pretty much whatever we wanted to do within reason, we just did. And so it wasn't something I was accustomed to, really having to tell myself, no, I can't do that, or no, I can't have that, or no, I shouldn't do those things. And so it was a real culture shock for myself, you know, and like I said, I expected these people to just immediately get on board around me and celebrate and support me. But the truth of the matter is they kind of took a wait and see approach. They were really curious about, you know, whether this was going to stick, whether I was going to kill myself, you know, physically from eating this way or whatever. So, yeah.
All right, well, let's get into exactly what you decided to do, right? Because maybe some people who are watching this are not like you and I, who've been ketogenic diet for years now. Maybe some of these people are just now getting into it. So I know that you're somebody who's very well researched in biochemistry, that you extensively look into all of the ins and outs of this, and you're one of my go-to guys for deep information on the keto dark web. So Tyler, can you please talk about what you decided to do, and maybe kind of go through some of the basics of the beginning of your journey, and maybe we can talk about some of the successes and failures that you experienced after that. But how'd you hear about keto, and what did you do to start?
So, I mean, I had played around, you know, you couldn't have been an athlete in the 90s and not have heard about people cutting, you know, using, you know, oh, cut the carbs and you'll drop the weight. So if you're trying to make weight for weigh-ins, or you're trying to, you know, to up a Wilks score for powerlifting or whatever, it's like, you know, those are just things that you do. So, I mean, I was vaguely familiar with it, but I only really knew about it in sort of that Atkins approach, you know, the ad libitum dieting, all the meat you can eat, you know, just stay below the 20 grams of carbohydrate and the world's a magic and happy place. And so that was kind of the approach that I would take. It was, I would eat whatever I wanted, as long as it wasn't starchy, carb heavy sort of food, right? You know, it would be, you know, ribeye steak or pulled pork barbecue or whatever. But that was kind of the approach that I took. And honestly, it worked for a while, you know, during that phase. So, I mean, I had some familiarity with how to do it in sort of, I guess, like the older way, right? But some of the newer stuff that had been written, you know, if I say newer, meaning probably like 97 and Lyle's book and that sort of thing, it's a little, you know, there were just differences. You know, I think Lyle was the first to, well, I said the first, but he was one of the first to really approach it from a systematic sort of a perspective. And so I got a copy of that book and started kind of reading and rereading and highlighting and reading those studies. And, you know, one of the things that I had to do was convince myself that doing this for any long period of time wasn't going to be harmful, because, you know, we're all victim to, you know, the myths and stuff that exist on the internet. Oh, it's hard on your kidneys, it's hard on your liver, your all that fat's going to clog up your artery. I mean, you know, the checklist, Tristan, you've seen those lists on the internet and all the reasons not to eat. You know, people die from eating ketogenic diets. And I just want to raise my hand and say, no,
they literally drop dead. They drop dead, and you know, saturated will kill you, and cholesterol is going to go up, and dietary cholesterol will kill you. I mean, there's so many myths, and you know, and especially since this was a few years back, and it's before a lot of this information has come to light, that cholesterol is not the enemy, that dietary fat and dietary cholesterol are necessary, and especially if you're going to be greatly restricting calories, those saturated fats are going to be necessary for creating hormones and all sorts of physiological processes that require these lipids. So yeah, it's understandable that people would be freaked out and maybe a little bit unsupportive, but yeah, it seems like that kind of makes individuals stronger in their resolve, because it forces you to look deeper into these issues and actually understand them at a more understand the fundamentals much better. So you started with kind of an Atkins style approach of, you know, basically focus on getting in protein. The satiety would be there.
I did. I kind of got enamored for a while with, you know, sort of the high fat, calories don't count, a little bit of, I would say the Taubes approach, but I don't think that people understand what Gary was saying quite as well as some folks think they do, and other folks thoroughly understand it.
Yeah, that's the Talbs thing is funny. It seems like there's a lot of ad hominem that goes on and straw man that goes on against him, and I've been guilty of this myself. And then I actually looked at what he said. I don't think he ever said energy balance is command and that you can eat as much fat and non-carbohydrate foods as you want and still lose body fat. But it seems the argument really is that there's a hormonal aspect that can influence the satiety and influence the amount of calories that one is comfortable intaking and that one desires to intake. So yeah, I agree with you.
People, maybe I'm just a unique unicorn here, and I'll wear that shirt proudly if somebody wants to print one up. But the reality for me is people always say, well, I'll listen to my satiety. I listen to my hunger signals. I eat when I'm hungry. And I think that when you've reached a point physically where you are not intentionally denying yourself some level of calorie intake for the sole purpose of trying to reduce your body fat, that probably works for a lot of people. But I got to be honest, I'm 10 years into this, 288 pounds down, and every friggin' day my body says, give me a box of candy bars. Or
oh, hey man, look, I'm pretty lean and in decent health too, and I still I can eat a lot more than I need to eat. I mean, I can get it and I can not stop. I think the body, with the abundance of very highly palatable foods available 24/7, I mean the body, I think, is intelligent and is always looking to store fat for that possible harsh winter that just never comes in our modern society.
Well, and that's the thing. I was having a discussion the other day on one of the forums online, and I said, somebody said, well, why did our ancestors not have to count calories? And I said, well, where do we start, right? They lived either outdoors or in homes that had no heat or air conditioning. They didn't work sedentary office jobs where they sat down 8 to 12 hours a day. They didn't have television to stare at. They went to bed when it got dark and got up when it got light. So from a rhythms of life sort of a perspective, they were doing things from a circadian perspective that were probably much healthier than what we do today. They weren't exposed to all kinds of external influences. They weren't being pushed the hyperpalatable, hypercaloric foods, hypercarbohydrate sort of foods that we get pushed today. I mean, they couldn't call Papa John's in the Stone Ages and have a pizza delivered. The dynamic or the difference between somebody who lived even 100 years ago, let alone 1,000 years ago, is vastly, vastly different than the society that we live in today. And I think that's the biggest problem with this whole debate, is that we've really distilled it down to almost like this political soundbite sort of a discussion, instead of really saying, just because energy balance is a complex equation does not mean that calories don't matter. It also doesn't mean that hormones don't matter. It also doesn't mean that exercise activity doesn't matter, or that non-exercise activity doesn't matter, or that the ambient temperature and humidity where you live doesn't matter, or the
your circadian rhythm,
your gender, your age, exactly.
Yeah. Or gut bacteria now is a big thing too. People are talking about the importance of the microbiome. All of these things can factor in. And oops, I'm hearing the echo again. Sorry if there's an echo, guys. I think it's important to consider all of these, but then to perhaps have a hierarchy of importance.
Yes.
Tyler, maybe if you turn the audio down a little bit, to where you can hear me, that might help with the echo thing. I don't want to tell you to put headphones on because I don't like wearing headphones myself, and I won't do it. I won't make you.
Let me see if I can figure out what I'm doing here. This is my first experience with
on the live Google Hangout. I guess I don't even anymore. It's it's through YouTube, but the window says Google Hangouts.
Okay, that any better?
Yes.
Okay, I turned you down and moved the microphone closer, so hopefully that'll help. If it doesn't, I'll throw on headphones. No worries.
It seems to be a transient phenomenon that comes in and out. Maybe it's just something to do with the Google Hangouts thing. But cool, man. So you started doing more kind of an Atkins style approach, and this was probably before the words ketogenic diet became such a hot topic like they are now. I mean, the words ketogenic diet are kind of, unfortunately and fortunately, and I guess I shouldn't put any, negative or positive connotation on it, but it's becoming a major fad, you know, and people are really catching on to keto. And it's like, if you go on Facebook now, there's 100 different ketogenic diet groups. Whereas, you know, I mean, if you go on YouTube, there's so much being talked about now. You know, a few years ago, there was basically a few individuals talking about keto on the internet. You and Luis were some of the first people that I connected with back in like 2013 or 14, whenever that was. And since then, this whole, I don't even want to call it low carb movement, because there's little unity in it, and there's a lot of infighting and pettiness at times, but there's a lot of stuff out there now. So back in the day when there was very little about this, how did you actually start to hear about the ketogenic diet in this context? And did you know, what kind of changes did you go through through trial and error as you were losing body fat?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, a lot of it was old web forums and, you know, different, you know, the books, the few that were even out there at the time. Like I said, I think I have printed, highlighted, marked through, critiqued, rewritten parts of Lyle's book, you know, just over and over and over, because it was about the best book that was out there from the late 90s into the 2000s. Probably prior to Finney and Volek's work, it was probably the, you know, the seminal work, and it's still a more technical piece of reading than by far than Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Living. But yeah, on a personal level, I mean, you know, tried the ad libitum dieting, tried the, oh, all you've got to do is increase fats and the, you know, the body melts away. And it's funny, every time that I tried to kind of go out and do something different, I come back to the same place, which is the primacy of protein. It is beyond the most important thing. If you, and again, this isn't me saying eat all the protein, you know, Schwarzenegger style, and, you know,
Now this is the internet, right? Like every statement must be taken to its utmost logical extreme, at utmost parabolic logical extreme. And I'm glad that you bring that up, man.
Yeah, exactly. No, you know, but so, you know, every time I came back to saying, hey, there needs to be some minimum level of protein, and I don't think it's the RDA or the RDI. I don't believe that to be the case. That seems too low based on, you know, my limited access to research at the time.
What is the RDA now?
So recommended daily allowance of protein, off the top of my head, and I have it scribbled down about 20 places and don't have it in front of me, but it ends up, I want to say it's around 0.4 grams per kilogram or somewhere thereabouts is rough math.
Is that 0.4 grams per kilogram of your lean body mass, or 0.4 grams per kilogram of your total body mass?
All the RDAs that I've ever seen are tied to total weight. But, you know, the thing is I started there and I simply said, if you don't get sufficient protein, every part of you falls apart. You know, your muscle, you know, muscle turnover is going to be negatively impacted. There's going to be, you know, a number of other things, because you think about the things that protein does. It's directionally important as it relates to immune function, to hormone function, to transport and signaling, to all of these things. Protein does all this stuff. We are effectively protein beings that can fuel off of fat or carbohydrate. The biggest problem is we don't systemically, as kind of a Western diet, get sufficient protein unless we're just people who like to eat steak, as opposed to people who want to eat chicken McNuggets or French fries or whatever. The only reason that we get sufficient protein is because we tend to overeat in general. So we get too much of everything. But, you know, so started with the basis there and started doing some research and reading on it, because things worked for a while. I mean, look, at 500 pounds, I could have eaten Twinkies, and as long as I stayed hypocaloric, I was going to lose weight. I mean, that's just a statement of fact. And then, you know, when I started eating ketogenic dieting and started to really focus on getting some of that hormetic control, some of the insulin and glucagon stuff regulated, all of a sudden that changed also, right? You know, I started losing some weight, but at some point just playing with the hormones wasn't enough anymore, right? I mean, at some point I couldn't drive insulin any lower. I couldn't artificially or somehow magically raise glucagon. And at some point, if I ate 9,000, 10,000 calories a day, even if it was basically nothing but fat, I was still gaining or at best break even. So I started saying this goofy tautology, it works until it doesn't. And it's a very true statement. When you do things like that, there is kind of an acute phase where it does work. But when you reduce it to an absurd place and say, oh, calories don't matter, all that matters is insulin and glucagon, at some point you're going to have regulated your hormones and you're going to have to do something else. And that something else do
insulin and glucagon matter?
Insulin and glucagon definitely matter.
Okay. And do calories, so total energy intake also matters. Insulin and glucagon matter. And there's other things that you mentioned as well, like ambient temperature, your energy level, your energy output throughout the day. There's so many factors, but yeah, energy balance, that's something that you experienced firsthand, it sounds like.
Yeah, it depends on how far down that rabbit hole you ever want to go. And trust me, we don't need to go down that rabbit hole. But I mean, the content of the macronutrients that you're consuming and the micronutrient quality of the meals that you're having, I mean, all of those things play into the conversation of what determines energy balance. And that's where people get conflicted they say, well, calories are a poor metric or a poor unit of measure. And I actually agree with them, but they're all we got.
Yeah.
I mean,
right. They're the only thing we have to measure this energy in versus energy out. And it's obvious that if you live a sedentary life and you intake a lot of food, even if it's just fat, you're not going to be tapping into your own body fat because you're exceeding the energy that you're putting out through putting in these so-called calories, which is, it's oversimplified, of course. And to say that calories in, calories out is all that matters. And if you just tell somebody to reduce their calories, it's all you need to do. It's going to work. It's going to work. It's going to work. That's not what Tyler's saying here. And it sounds to me like there's almost kind of semantic arguments that go on the internet. And perhaps you and I are more accustomed to it. And a lot of the newer viewers are probably seeing a lot of this stuff out there. And I think it causes a lot of confusion. But I guess the takeaway from this segment would be, yeah, energy balance matters. I think any who's tried has experienced that. And perhaps eating about maintenance while you're transitioning into a ketogenic diet can be pretty helpful because you're going to reduce the stress of the body, feeling that lack of energy input as you're switching over from burning glucose to primarily burning fat in ketone bodies. So, but eventually one will have to tap down on that body fat a little bit, or tap into that body fat. And the only way to do that is through reducing that dietary fat. And I guess you found that no matter what happened, there was a minimum protein requirement for you to maintain your health and your vitality. Now, like these terms get thrown around so much, right? Too much protein, too little protein. Can you go ahead and unpack that and go ahead and define it? We talked about the RDA earlier.
You're going to get me in trouble.
What's a good amount of protein for you? And let's talk about just from your experience, and then we can talk about the broader theoretical concept of like what the heck is too much protein and how do you define this? Because I see this get thrown around all the time, like, oh, well, too much protein, but it's very sloppily defined.
First thing that I'll say is there is probably anecdotal evidence and research evidence that indicates that a good mean working average for most folks is as a rough math equation about 0.75 grams per pound of lean mass. And I think it's important to draw that distinction, and it's something that Luis and I have talked about a lot. And one of the things that went into the calculator early on were to use lean mass as opposed to total body weight, just in the rationale that it is your muscle mass much more so than your fat mass that helps to drive your metabolism in general. So two people standing side by side that weigh 180 pounds aren't carrying necessarily the same amount of lean mass. What if one is 5'6" and has a belly and the other 6'3" and is muscular and lean? Those two people are going to have different metabolic requirements just because inside their skin, they're made up differently. I think there's probably sufficient evidence to say somewhere between about 0.7 and 0.8 grams for someone who's not actively resistance training is about an ideal place for most folks to be. There is an argument that as long as you're in what is called nitrogen balance, which is sort of a rough, ham-fisted way that we look at the amount of losses that we have. I feel like I'm doing a chemistry primer here, and I'm sorry. So the one thing that makes, or one of the things that makes protein different than other macronutrients is that they actually have an amine group. There's a nitrogen component to that, and it's the only place in our diet that we get that nitrogen, right? Or one of the only principal places we get that nitrogen. And so we can use that nitrogen and how much we spill out from sweat, how much we urinate out, how much is defecated out, how much is breathed out, whatever, as a metric for measuring whether or not we're getting sufficient protein in our diet to offset those losses. I think that the question probably needs to pivot away from how much is the minimum that I can get away with to what is the optimum for the individual. And so I was kind of saying somewhere between probably 0.7 or 0.8 grams if you're not training. If you're somebody who's in a gym 90 to 120 minutes a day, 5-6 days a week, that's going to go up because you're doing more physical damage to your muscle, and you've probably got more muscle to deal with, right? I mean, you've got that going on. You've also got, the spikes in insulin that we see related to resistance exercise and those kinds of things. But if you're sedentary, it probably goes down somewhat. If you're somebody who's bedridden or spends the bulk of their day on a couch for whatever reason, that may go down to 0.6, 0.6, 0.7, right in that lower bout of that.
You're talking
range.
about per pound of
lean body mass, yes.
Now I've seen a lot of, and I've got an article on the on our website, primaledgehealth.com. I've got an article about optimal protein intake, and through a lot of my research, I kind of found that most of the studies, even on resistance training athletes, find that about 0.8 grams per pound of lean body mass was sufficient, and above that didn't really improve muscle protein synthesis and recovery. So yeah, you're kind of right on the ball with what my research has led me to believe over the years, that around 0.8 grams per pound of lean body mass is probably optimal. And but I mean, as far as maintaining blood ketone levels, now there's different reasons that people would be doing a ketogenic diet, right? So some people are doing a ketogenic diet strictly to change how their body appears. Other people are doing a ketogenic diet because they find that elevating blood ketone alleviates symptoms or completely eliminate certain, pathogenic or certain disease states. I mean, people are epileptic, or people dealing with cancers or autoimmune conditions might be shooting for elevated blood ketones.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably important that we define these things, just like you said, somebody who's sedentary or somebody who's active, but also the blood ketone levels. Is there any research about what levels of protein intake will allow for elevated blood ketones and the relationship between amino acid consumption and blood ketone levels?
So the first thing that I'll say is this. I've not seen any real data. I've seen a lot of anecdote, and I've seen a lot of, hey, me too. And there have been several folks that have tried to quantify the relationship between how much protein I take in and what it does to my blood ketone levels. And there's some different thoughts on why that is. There's some theories around some of the proteins being oxidized for energy, and so the body just simply doesn't need that much in the way of ketone. There's some nuanced stuff there, and it'll take an hour for us to unpack it. So I'll pause it, and I may write on it at some point, and we'll talk. But yeah, the long and short of it here is this. So when you take in protein, you will see glucose show up in the blood, but it shows up in the blood because of the hormones that we talked about before, or at least that's the suspected. Yeah, glucagon and insulin, yes. So typically,
can you just go ahead and quickly tell people what glucagon and insulin do? I'm
Sure.
sorry, I know that's a huge question, but just briefly.
It's fine. They both do a lot of things, right? They're both signaling hormones for a number of metabolic functions that probably beggar belief to get into. But two things that they really do that are very handy. Insulin drives things into cells, and glucagon takes things out of cells, is probably the simplest way to say that. So if you need to get glucose into a cell, one of the fastest ways to do that is to introduce insulin, either injectable insulin or insulin from your pancreas, right? When you do that, it moves through the blood supply and the cells, especially like myocytes and several of the other cells, so muscle cells, those kinds of things that like glucose just an awful lot, have receptors on them that go, oh, hey, insulin, that must mean that blood glucose is high enough in the blood that I can go grab some. Quick, let me send some stuff out here to get it. And so they move these receptors over to the cells, membrane, and they pull that glucose out of your blood and into the cells. That is insulin's primary function, is to get glucose into cells, because if you don't, then you die. And then glucagon, I think I said that backwards. I'm sorry, insulin does that. Glucagon does almost the polar opposite. And the reason that it's there is, so let's assume for the moment that you are hypoglycemic, right? That insulin has done too good a job, or maybe you're in sort of a semi-fasted or a fasted state because you've been, exercising really, really hard and you can't stop and eat, or you are on a 4-day hike and you ran out of food or whatever. Glucagon is really good at going to the liver and recruiting what's called hepatic glycogen. So the stored glucose that sits in your liver and hangs out, it goes and recruits that glucose and says, hey, be free, because we need you. The body's hypoglycemic. It doesn't have enough blood glucose going on. And so those two work. And I like to use the analogy of almost like a tug of war, where glucagon and insulin are on opposite sides of a rope, and they're literally just pulling to try and keep the flag in between the two sticks. It's too low and you become hypoglycemic, and too hypoglycemic and you drop into a coma and die. And the converse is you become hyperglycemic, a lot of bad things happen, like death as well. So they do tend to keep each other kind of like buoys in the water, keeps the blood glucose right down the center pipe. But what's interesting is the presence or absence of insulin actually does some other things too. The presence of insulin actually downregulates lipolysis. And what that means in layman's terms is it actually, its mere presence tells the fat cells to slow down the activity of something called hormone-sensitive lipase. And those of you that are really into Taubes's work will know HSL really well. But it's
can we stop there and unpack something else, which is very common? So therefore, eating protein raises insulin. Eating protein stops ketosis. This would be the argument against eating over a certain amount of protein, with the crowd that would say, look, you want to eat as minimal protein as you could possibly get away with and maintain good health. What say you to that analysis of those facts?
First of all, I will say this: in the relatively metabolically healthy individual, and what I mean by that is somebody who is not an out-of-control type 2 diabetic, someone who is not wildly insulin resistant, or someone who is not a type 1 diabetic. The evidence indicates that those people, the insulin spike that occurs from eating just about any reasonable amount of protein is about the same. So eating any protein is likely to trigger a very similar reaction to eating 40, 60 grams of protein at one sitting.
And how long will that elevated insulin likely suppress lipolysis?
In a very short window of time. And there's a good reason that protein and insulin go hand in hand, because insulin is also important in getting amino acids into the cells as well. So if there were no insulin present, then lots of bad stuff can happen in terms of body recomposition and repairing yourself from damage. So it's actually a good thing that insulin shows up on the scene when you eat protein, because that means your body's trying to do its actual job.
Okay. Okay. So now I don't want to make this all about the silly protein arguments, because it's a cyclical, cycle. It's a thing that never ends, right? It's the song that never ends, just goes on and on, my friends.
So yeah, to put a cap on it, then I would simply say this: with respect to protein intake, I think we need to ask ourselves not what is the minimal amount for life to go on, and instead ask ourselves, where do I feel the best and where is my body responding the best? And in order to really gauge that, we need some level of testing like DEXA scans or bod pods or something like that that's got some scientific credibility, or we need to trust what data we have from research studies that did have access to those tools say, and stop trying to make ourselves metabolic snowflakes. It's really surprising how many times I have a conversation with somebody who says, "Oh, I'm insulin resistant," and I'll say, "Oh, just you want to do a consult in your IR? Okay, cool. Can you send me over copy of your lab work so I can see it?" "Oh, I didn't actually have any lab work. I just know that I'm insulin resistant."
Yeah. You've heard a few podcasts, and they said that you're insulin resistant, and this is a common thing, man. Look, for me, I would say this: gross lack of protein will negatively affect weight loss far more than a slight. And when I say overconsumption, it's loaded. It's too loaded of a term, but for negatively affecting your health and your body composition by avoiding protein to a fault, then you are at risk doing the same thing. And you are at risk of ruining your body composition through eating 10 extra grams of protein per day. Those 10 extra grams at maximum would create how many grams of glucose? I mean, you look at the amount of glucogenic amino acids in that protein, that extra 10, 20, even 30 grams of protein that people are tripping about all the time would have a minimal effect on your total serum glucose levels if all these gluconeogenesis like worries are valid. And I'm not saying they're invalid. I'm saying I think we just need to see a little bit more research on this before that there's a definitive thing. And I want to err on the side of safety, because I mean, I can't tell you how many clients have come to me and they've been eating 20, 30, like literally, like women eating 30 grams of protein a day, men doing 50 grams of protein a day, and they're just they don't, and they wonder why they feel like crap. They're getting told to eat 220 grams of fat, 50 grams of protein. So going back to just unpacking this ketogenic diet thing and how, I mean, you lost 288 pounds. So, I keep saying that, I keep reiterating it, but to me, this does make it, it makes your N of 1 experience incredibly valid. And he's not the only one who's lost a lot of body fat using a ketogenic diet. Now, what else have you learned along the way? So we talked about the importance of protein. You realized that protein was probably the most important macronutrient for you to focus on. Now, what about fat intake? I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there, and you eat more fat, you burn more fat. Butter makes your pants fall off. There's the picture of Jimmy Moore with a stick of butter on a plate, and it's used over and over again to try to discredit ketogenic diets. And and it's kind of effective, unfortunately, for a lot of people. But so what's up with the fat intake? What have you found worked for you, and what has the research shown as well?
So first of all, I think, looking at like Volek's faster study and some of the other studies that are out there, we definitely see that the rates of lipolysis, so the amount of fat that you can actually create from your own stores at any given time, are substantially higher than what we really thought possible, especially in people who are very, very fit. Definitely, and I've tried this experiment because I'm an idiot, tried to crash, and I do mean crash fat, to the point that I was eating, sort of this 7-day cyclical thing where 2 or 3 days I was eating less than 400 or 500 calories a day, literally pure protein and nothing else, just to see what would happen. One of the interesting things is I felt terrible. I mean, I joke, I literally laid on the couch debating whether it would be less hassle to clean up after myself if I used the restroom than to get up and walk the 15 feet to the restroom and go there. That's how lacking of energy I was. So there is absolutely.
Well, I'm glad that you said this, because I think a lot of people, they like to, infer hyperbole, right? So in no way is he saying you just have to eat a bunch of protein and fat.
No.
Needs to be avoided, because that's what gets inferred in the internet, hyperbole. Everybody's got to take it to the extreme of inference. And So thank you for talking about that. Continue, please.
But there is a point at which, you know, I know what my body is burning at any given point in time, and I don't think there's any data to support a metabolic advantage, or not a substantial metabolic advantage, to a ketogenic diet. So
what do you mean by metabolic advantage?
I don't think that there is enough data for us to definitively say that eating a ketogenic diet means that I can eat substantially more calories and not in a chronic state gain weight.
Mm-hmm. Now there was a study recently. Wasn't there a study that showed that there was about a 300 calorie difference in energy expenditure between a high fat, low carb diet and a standard American diet? I didn't really look at the study. I just saw the abstract and some people claiming on it. But do you know what I'm talking about, or am I talking about it?
There are also some studies that are out there that show zero or even a negative metabolic advantage. So without having to go back and really look at the relative health and physiology of the individuals, what I'd like to see is that same group of people in sort of a washout study where they track those same individuals instead of trying to divide into two groups, sort of a model. Because you can get really creative with what's called like p-hacking by really reducing or enlarging the number of people in each population to manipulate what you want to show there. But either way, not familiar enough with that study to really have an opinion on it. But the point that I'm making is, so, okay, let's assume it's 300 calories, right? I mean,
I'm not saying that we should. I'm just saying that I've seen, like, there might have been a study that said that, but I could just be completely talking out of my butt cheeks.
No, you're probably right. I try and keep up, but there's so many studies on this topic coming out these days because, to your point, people are trying to prove or disprove, discredit, you know, the approach. But, you know, I think that the interesting thing there is this. We can metabolize a great deal of the fat that we need daily for energy in a ketogenic dieting schema, if you will, simply through lipolysis, simply through freeing up the fats in our body. But not all of them. And so definitely it really depends on what you're doing. If you're out exercising, if you're running, you know, half marathon training or you're powerlifting 2 hours a day, you probably within reason aren't going to eat too much fat to at least maintain. You may have to cut down some if you're trying to lose. If you're somebody who sits on a couch the bulk of the day watching soap operas and eating, you know, whatever, you don't need 250 grams of fat to get through the day. You just simply don't. And I'm not convinced that eating too much fat's going to do anything other than lead to oily bathroom experiences. And I'll be gentle and leave it at that. It's going to pass through you to some degree. Some of it's going to be picked up and stored in adipocytes. And, you know, again, it gets into what type of fat are we talking about, because they all have different metabolic fates. So again.
Okay. Can everybody hear okay? Is the audio good?
I can hear you, if that counts.
Okay, cool. Yeah. It seemed like there was a little glitch there for a minute. Fantastic, man. All right. So, so the fats, Ketogains likes to say. Now, I guess I should say Luis Villaseñor, aka Darth Luigi, the Sith Lord of Ketogains forum and the Ketogains group. He started the Ketogains Reddit forum, and it seems like most of the energy has shifted to Facebook as the internet has changed and Facebook has monopolized all human social interaction. Luis says protein is a goal, carbs are a limit, and fats are a lever. Now, I think it's a pretty good analogy. I think it works. You're talking, you crank down your fats way too low, and it wasn't ideal. If you crank up them fats way too high, good luck burning body fat when you're giving yourself 5,000 calories of exogenous energy sources. Body's not going to just throw those away and burn your own body fat, because energy balance is part of the equation. Regardless of if we want to argue what the most important part of the equation is, energy balance does matter. So for you, long-term weight loss, long-term fat loss, was it just a linear thing, or did it take some adjustment? What kind of adjustments have you gone through especially concerning the fats. Now, I know the protein has remained relatively stable for you, and that is something that you guys, especially at Ketogains, are always talking about. And I concur with you guys. And that's why I send people to your group all the time and collaborate with you guys all the time, because you're good, genuine people who want to help people, who are helping lots of people. And I like the work you do, and I just like you as human beings. And what else have you discovered along the way of this non-linear adventure to from 505 pounds to under 200 pounds soon?
I was talking with one of our group clients a while back, and one of the things that, you know, she was getting frustrated that she had been a couple of weeks without losing. And I said, I got to tell you, I said, here's a fun story. I said, when I was getting right to about 300 pounds, so somewhere between about 315 and 302, for 18 months, I stayed right in that range. I would go down, I would go up, I would go down, I would go up. Guess what? I'm now about 217, and I eat almost exactly the same macros as I ate at the time that I was weighing 315 to 302. And the reality here is this: nothing really changed. I was doing all the right things, but the body was just doing body stuff. And I think that that's one of the things that I had to learn, was to let go of the scale as the metric by which I measured myself, and simply say, are my pants fitting looser? Am I performing all right in the gym? Do things work well? You know? And the answer was, yeah, things were improving in that respect, but the scale simply wouldn't move. And I just had to divorce myself from using the scale as anything other than a directional measure. But the problem is, so often we get hung up on that measurement. We go, oh, well, my weight's not going down. My weight's staying the same. And you ask, well, how long has it been? Oh, a week, 2 weeks. You know, and it's easy a decade into this to step back and go, okay, you know, let's sit down and chat, right? It's another thing with dealing with somebody who's got 6 weeks to get into a dress for a wedding or something else. It's like this panic moment, got to do whatever, crash, crash, crash. You know, the truth of the matter is, you can be doing all the right things, and sometimes the body just does body stuff. Sometimes you could be doing some of the wrong things, and it's limiting your ability for the body to do what it wants to do. And I think that the wiser approach is to really consider all options and do the research and come back and say, and it's something that I had to do for myself, what is an appropriate, what does an appropriate set of macros look like for me? How should I track those things? Is fasting or intermittent fasting really advantageous or beneficial to me? And I'm kind of up in the air about that one still a little bit. But
Okay. This is something that is really, really interesting, just to pivot, perhaps unnecessarily and perhaps annoyingly. I'm sorry if the audience is not wanting to pivot in this direction, but the fasting thing is fascinating to me. So I know that through, just through interacting with you guys in the Ketogains group, that Louis and yourself has said that fasting has no benefits, and that intermittent fasting 16 hours will give you just as many benefits. Now, I think this is something cool that we can unpack because it's just been too much of a love fest. So I'm going to respectfully disagree with you guys there and say that from the research that I've seen, fasting can have incredible health benefits, but I don't like the way that's being marketed now. I think that it can be an excuse for eating disorders and can really influence disordered eating long term. But I do think that there's a lot of research out there showing that the deep autophagy, like the activation of like the FOXO3 genes and the sweeping up effect that happens during fasting. I mean, and then there's the anecdotal stuff of people's like skin tags falling off. The research into fasting and cancer and fasting mimicking diets, like super calorie restricted, super ketogenic diets for treating cancers and for boosting the immune system, as well as like these studies of like 3 days fast complete system, and my own personal experience. But just to finish off my long rant, just to hear my voice a little bit more, I'm going to go ahead and say that I've had personal experiences with fasting that were incredibly powerful, but I think fasting for body composition is purely stupid. And if you're just going to be fasting for body composition and you're not doing it as some sort of a spiritual battle, which is what I think fasting should be, in the ancient way of fasting, it was a connection to the higher power, a deeper connection to life, and a deeper connection to the profundity of life, not about vanity and losing that 50 pounds that you keep gaining back because you can't maintain a proper, dietary regime that's healthy. So, yeah, what do you think about fasting, man, after I just loaded up everything?
One of the things that I'll say is this. With respect to fasting, I do think there are benefits, and I think Luis would agree as well. The thing that gets frustrating is people want to self-flagellate, right? I mean, you'll see these folks, and we had a couple today, and I think as you get toward the end of the year with the holidays and all the overeating and all that stuff, their answer is, well, I'm going to fast for 3 days, or I'm going to fast for 7 days, I'm going to fast for 10 days. Well, why? Well, because it'll help my body.
Because I feel fat because I ate the carbs. Yeah.
It's like, okay, extend yourself grace, forgive yourself for that behavior, ask yourself why that happened, and then learn from that and grow from that. But don't punish yourself 7 days after the fact for the sole purpose of the scale went up 7 pounds. That is disordered, it is unhealthy, and it is dangerous. And my biggest issue with respect to the longer term fasting, and I've had this debate in a couple of different forums and with some friends that I really respect in this kind of keto sphere, is it's a concern when you couple multiple day or alternate day fasting with fear of protein. That's where I really get concerned when I see someone who's, a 300-pound individual who's 6'4", 6'6", who's eating 60, 70 grams of protein a day, and then every other day he's not eating any protein at all.
Because 70 grams of protein for an individual like that could be sufficient if they're eating that protein every day, but eating every other day, I'm not into the alternate day fasting
and so it starts to get to a point where, and the research data says that after about 16 hours or so, you start to get into issues with the body beginning, and that's why you'll even hear Dr. Finney, I think in his the Q&A portion that's been shared from like the Low Carb Down Under video, is talking about kind of that 16-hour window. There does seem to be some evidence that the body starts to freak out a little bit, right? It begins to start to self-immolate some of the protein, if you will. It starts to go and cannibalize some of the lean mass.
Yes, it does. Now the other side would be saying, right, that it would only be taking what's unnecessary, that you would be flagging the weaker cells and clearing out old mitochondria, which is called mitophagy. And their argument is that you won't be catabolizing your lean mass. I will say that extended fasting definitely catabolizes lean mass. And that would be a horrible thing if you're doing it for the right reasons, right? Like if you're just doing it, like you said, self-flagellating and creating this unhealthy mental state and you got off track, so you want to beat yourself up about it, that's not a healthy way to fast. And I see that we actually completely agree on this whole thing.
No, but I think that they're probably, if you're talking about an intermittent fasting window, I don't think there's a lot of evidence to indicate that fasting windows longer than 16 hours are in any way beneficial. And I would really encourage people, and I can even drop in and send you some links to some studies that I think would be some really interesting studies around insulin resistance and insulin sensitivity in fasts longer than 16 hours and some other stuff that would give you some indications as to why the body doesn't seem to care to go longer periods than that in an ideal state. Then secondarily to your point, from the autophagy, from getting deeply ketotic, from getting into issues of epilepsy and cancer treatments and all those kinds of things, I think there are some clear health benefits to a very infrequent sort of multi-day fasting. Call it, call it 2 or 3 days once a month, or, a week fast every 6 months or whatever. Yeah, sure, no problem. But the problem is you get into these folks, and I ran into to one who reached out to me privately, and I'll be gender non-specific because I don't want to embarrass the person, and I want to be very clear. Somebody who's been active on several of the forums for quite some time, who said to me that they were practicing 4 days of not eating in a week and 3 days of eating in a week, but they were eating Ketogains macros on their eating day, so that's totally good, right? And I raised my hand and I said, well, why are you doing those 4 days off? Well, because my grandmother passed away from cancer. I'm like, well, I'm terribly sorry to hear about your grandmother, but is there any incidence or any indication that you've got either a genetic predisposition to cancer or anything going on? No. Well, then why are you doing this? And what it got down to was that the person was really unhappy with their weight loss, and they were trying again to expedite weight loss. And I mean, sure, you can starve yourself skinny, but a greater portion of that weight that's being lost is going to be lean mass than it would be if you sort of entered into a semi-starvation or a even like a PSMF or protein sparing modified fast type approach. So
yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, I don't know. As far as the evidence goes, like the scientific research out there on fasting from what I've seen, I definitely am convinced that there are benefits to extended fasting. I mean, the 3-day fasts and stuff like that. But I think context is huge. Completely concur with you on that, man. If you're just doing it because you're unhappy with weight loss, because you're afraid of something, then yeah, I think that's probably not the best idea for you.
The other thing is so frequently I'll run into people who say, oh, well, I did this 3-day fast and I was good, but then I ate again. And next thing I know, I was ordering a pizza or baking cookies. And I do think.
Yes, this is the thing. It's the way that you do the fast and the way that you initiate it and come out of it is so important. You just fasted for 30 days and you go eat a big old meal of anything. Good luck. Have a nice day on the toilet.
If you don't kill yourself. I mean, quite literally, there are evidences of history of people trying to do the right thing by people they found that had been floating in a boat on the ocean for months, fed them big, rich meals, and next thing you know, they died in the hospital. You
have to reintroduce that food very gently. And I think that's kind of a weird thing with some of the people that are promoting fasting now. They're doing these long fasts, and then they just say, and then I ended my fast. And then you look at some of the data, like for instance, and I'm not trying to pick on Jimmy Moore. I got no problem with Jimmy Moore personally. I wish people wouldn't take it so personally when somebody critiques an opinion. But yeah, I mean, if you look at his fasting experiment data, he for like a whole month, but there was a lot of days in there where he says he called it paused the fast, and I guess that means he ate. But he doesn't specify what he ate, how much he ate, the effects that had on his system. And, I don't know. The whole fasting thing, I think it's a powerful tool, but not for body composition intent, like as the intention. I think it's something that people need to, if they're going to be doing it, it's something they better take a little bit more seriously and a little bit less flippantly. And when promoting it, I think it should be taken a little bit more seriously to consider how to really end the fast without hurting or killing yourself, especially if you're promoting long fasts.
Exactly. What are you trying to accomplish in this? What are you trying to teach yourself? I mean, even from a self-discipline perspective that you mentioned before, what are you trying to get out of it is a good thing to spell out going in so that when you come out the other side that you're not tempted to just go right back to what you were doing before that may or may not have been working or whatever. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And let me just reiterate again, my opinion on fasting. You're going to be fasting. I really hope that you're doing it for a far deeper reason. And I hope it's, this term gets loaded up as well, but I hope it's for spiritual reasons and not for reasons of vanity and for trying to make yourself look better or capitalize on current fads. So sure. Let's move on from that. Sorry for the tangent for those of you who don't care about fasting at all, but that's something that's pretty popular now. It's like the low carb world. Bill Lagakos said the other day something like the low carb world went from I won't starve myself on a low fat diet to, well, it's okay to starve yourself indefinitely as long as before that you ate a high fat diet. So I think it's kind of strange.
It is kind of ironic that at the end of the day, what does fasting do from a caloric perspective? If you look
energy.
If you look at it from a macro perspective, if you look at it on like a 7-day cycle or a 10-day cycle or 40-day cycle,
calories don't matter.
Moving average of calories, what is introducing multiple days of fasting in that window or multiple hours of fasting really do? It seems I say this tongue in cheek because I know I'm going to catch flack for saying it, but it does seem a little bit like a really novel way to get people to eat less. I mean, if I were to be really
without ever mentioning energy balance, that's a
exactly, and that's what I'm saying.
clever,
Maybe
clever
do
thing.
this, and that's okay. And you don't have to write me letters and tell me you hate me. That's an inferred thing with some folks, I think. But yeah, it's all
weird
good.
that happens, man. That's so strange. Because I mean, the work that you guys do with Ketogains is great. That's why I like supporting you guys, and why I've been promoting you guys since I started this channel, basically. So, yeah, thanks for the honest opinions. And you see, people, there can be respectful disagreements. There can be respectful disagreements on possible. It is possible. Difficult, but it's possible. So let's move on, man. Pounds. How long did that take you to drop?
I am right about a decade right now. Truthfully, I think I'm kind of coming to the end of that railroad, and at this point, it's probably going to be putting a scalpel in the hands of a skilled surgeon to get rid of all the damage that I've done to myself from getting as heavy as I did. But the truth of the matter is, trying to diet down any more than I actually am right now is probably going to end up in an unhealthy place, quite frankly, because a lot of the weight is in fact just loose skin and that sort of thing. So
let's talk about that, man. That's a major thing. A lot of people get very insecure about that. Clients I've worked with, I mean, like when they've got 100 pounds to lose, which I've seen people do it in a year. But that's not always the case, people. You got to, be easy on the body. You don't want to bash yourself and destroy yourself on the way down. What's up with the loose skin, man? Like, what are some options for people, and what have you found that, I mean, going from somebody 500 pounds probably had a significant amount of it. What advice would you give to people about the loose skin, and what can they do about it?
So a couple of things I'll say. One, it's a hugely individual thing. And what I mean by that is twofold. One, whether it bothers people or not, some people wear it almost like a badge of courage. Other people, want it gone sooner than they probably should. Yeah. But then the second issue is, when you look at it, it's so multifaceted, right? Go figure again, context, right? If you're a 60-year-old postmenopausal woman who has been obese most of her life and has dieted down and gotten to a point where you want to have loose skin removed, you probably need to, because very candid, the chances of the skin rebounding, regardless of what you do to that skin, are probably pretty slim. For somebody who's 20 or 30 and a former athlete who's gotten chubby and had a nice big belly, and then the belly went away, give it some time. There's a lot of anecdotal stuff out there about like fascia blasters and those kinds of, treatments, salt scrubs and all of that. I got to be honest, I haven't seen any real research data on it. And so there's a part of me that wonders if it's not the rock that keeps the tigers away, and that the skin is just doing whatever the skin is going to do. And that people are giving those treatments more credence than what they deserve. But I don't know that. It's not my opinion. It's just one of those things that I ask myself, right? But I do think that for somebody who's been massively overweight and then gotten to a healthy weight, there is sort of a proverbial 10 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound sack that you've done to that skin, and that there's probably not much that you can do to fix that other than trusting your surgeon to take it off in the best way possible, and to
now what about the surgery? What do you know about the surgery, like cost and stuff like that? I mean, do you have any cost benefit analysis stuff that you could maybe offer advice to people on? Because I mean, the loose skin, it is something that does bother some people. I've seen some people just rock it and say, this is me, this is awesome, look where I used to be, I have this as a reminder every day. That's awesome too, but obviously you can't expect everybody to feel the same way.
So it really does depend. Region of the country, access to surgeons, competition, all that stuff. And I'm speaking strictly from a U.S. perspective here. It really does tend to drive that price point quite a bit. I've seen folks come to me and say, hey, I'm looking at having this done, and oh, by the way, it's like $28,000.
Dang,
Conversely,
$28,000, a lot of dough, man.
yes, it is. And I've seen some other folks who are having very similar work done in, say, someplace a little smaller, say Houston, for example, instead of LA or New York. And all of a sudden, it's $13,000 or $14,000 just because of availability and the doctor's cost of operations and whatever else. There are some
Now,
other
what
options
about, do you
going
know
on.
anything about like Mexico? I mean, a lot of
Yeah,
people get surgery and dental work done in Mexico because
sure,
there's good doctors in some of these areas.
very much so.
And is Luis doing surgery? No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I mean, I think that could be an option too.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. It's my surgeon will actually be in Mexico, principally just because I've got kind of a support structure down there to help me out. If you're going to look at doing foreign surgery like that, I would encourage you to investigate aftercare very, very carefully and to spell all that out ahead of time because you're going to need help. Everyone I've ever worked with who's gone through this and decided to have the skin removal surgery has needed assistance. And if you're not kind of back home with the folks or with your family around to help you to get up and go to the restroom and sit at a dinner table and do all the things you need to do, it's just going to make recovery that much more awful for you. So yeah, I would definitely encourage people if they're considering it, especially US folks with a strong dollar. It's probably going to be cheaper to go overseas if that's something you're comfortable with. But I would really encourage folks to spell out their aftercare plan and how they're going to be seen and all of that other stuff and make sure that the cost benefit still breaks down if you have to fly back there a couple of times to have revisions done or if there's any complications or anything else that you need to factor into that math as well. So, but yeah, I mean, it definitely can be cheaper. In fact, it will be much cheaper for me to go out of the country to have it done than it would here in the States. But that's principally because of the cost of the hospital care for overnight stays here. So,
Yeah. So, do you have an estimation on what, what a surgery like what you're doing might cost somebody if they do opt to go to a reputable doctor in Mexico?
it's hard to put a number on it because it's so, is it a mini? Is it a circumferential? Is it a fleur de lis? Is it, are they doing top and bottom? Are they doing multiple surgeries? My estimation would be probably somewhere south of $12,000 is a spitball number. I don't, that's going to vary, I'm sure, depending on how strong the dollar is against the peso at any point in time.
Right.
But that is one thing
it's no matter. No, it sounds like no matter which way you're going to go about it, the surgery is a healthy chunk out of the piggy bank.
It is a not cheap conversation. Yeah, for sure. It may
But
go
a conversation that a lot of people opt for, and it seems like it does help some people psychologically.
Very much so. I think one thing too would be to consider if you can get some of the work covered under insurance in the U.S. So, for example, folks that have lost a substantial amount of weight that have had a history of back problems that have loose skin in the front, sometimes insurances will cover the removal of some portion of that skin just from the perspective of it'll help alleviate the back issues. And so they're figuring it's going to save them money in the long run. The same with like breast lifts and that type of thing. But I think insurances, from what I've been told, are tightening down a little bit more on, some of those approvals. So I think it's almost going to be, save the pennies, save the dollars, and, pursue it in whatever direction you think makes the most sense.
This has been a really great conversation, man. I'm so glad that you came on. Let's got a couple more things I'd like to hit on briefly, and
Sure.
and then we can wrap this up because my wife's sick of being quiet. So I asked you earlier, and then we took about 10 different, very fun, very informative tangents. I was asking you about the nonlinear aspect of it, and I think a lot of people struggle with this, right? Someone who's got 50 to 100 pounds to lose has to understand that that if you track your weight loss and you're going to graph it on your TI 83 plus, it's not just going to be a X plus 5 line down to the goal. It's going to look more like a sine wave. It's going to be fluctuating up and down a little bit. So what advice would you give to people who are concerned about what they would consider like a stall? I mean, you dropped 288 pounds it didn't just happen overnight. You've been on this journey for about 10 years now. So what's some advice to people who have started their journey and maybe aren't satisfied at the moment with the rapidity of their weight loss or their fat loss, which is what we're going for? We don't want lean muscle mass loss. You want fat loss. So what would you say to those people who are struggling with that?
I think the first thing is they need to step back and ask themselves, am I eating the right way? Right. I mean, so you really almost have to let yourself be convinced that the way that you're eating in terms of the macros and the calories and, the quality of the food that you're eating as well are all on point first. But secondarily to that, you almost have to step back and be honest with yourself about your situation. Somebody who's actively doing some level of exercise, eating proper macros, is younger, specifically younger and male. You can't compare that to somebody who's perimenopausal and, all sorts of, age related issues. And you just almost can't do side by side and go, well, how come I don't lose? And then the problem is you see like these before and afters of people who have lost these huge amounts of weight. And you start to do this comparison game thing where it's like, well, how come I don't get to lose that fast? I'm doing all the right things. And all I can tell you is after a decade of doing this and helping hundreds and hundreds of people, nothing good ever comes out of comparing yourself to somebody else when it relates to weight loss at all. It just will not end well. And I think that, and kind of the last thing that I would throw in there would be to say, if the scale is an issue, honestly, check yourself maybe once a month and go buy your clothes. I mean, buy your clothes, but physically, are my clothes fitting looser? And don't play that game where you wear the same pair of jeans for 4 days and then claim that you lost rapid weight because the jeans got a little stretchy. Like, legitimately be honest with yourself and say, like, are these legitimately fitting me looser today than they were before? Or,
Yes.
maybe have a pair of like goal pants or whatever that you try on.
I'm gonna go ahead and say though, you should be wearing those jeans for more than one day, because jeans just don't feel right until after like 2 days of proper wear. They're so much better when they're loosened up like that, right? I don't even wear jeans anymore. I can't wear them. It's like 70 degrees here, 60, 70 always. I'm permanently in like mesh shorts.
Ooh. Ooh. Okay. So I don't know what just happened here. So I'm going to talk and people are going to run away, and that's okay. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, to wrap up what I was saying before, for those of you that may still be here, look, the scale's going to do what the scale's going to do. Your body's going to do what it's going to do. You just have to be responsible for the behaviors that will ultimately lead to the outcome that you want. If you do that, I do think that there is no reason to get too obsessed about the speed at which you progress. I think that if you are in a situation where you're not progressing at all for some long period of time, a month, 2 months, step back and ask yourself what's really going on and see if there's an issue there that needs to be addressed. Either you're not really as dialed in from a dietetics perspective, what are you eating and how much you're eating, or maybe you're overestimating the amount of calories that you're burning in the gym, or something along those lines. But you do need to step back and ask yourself and kind of do this after action report when these kinds of things happen and figure out what's going on. If you do those things, I do think that it tends to flatten that curve out a little bit that Tristan was talking about. But there are some interesting sort of peaks and valleys that just happen. It's not going to be linear. You are going to flatten out for some period of time. You are, going to have those moments where you think that the scale is going to be your buddy and it's not. You think that the genes are going to be your friend and they're not. And then, you just continue to persevere. You continue to do things the right way. And ultimately those things come back around. And there's Tristan back on the internet. Hello, sir.
So that was so awesome. You guys, I'm sorry if Tyler said anything offensive or anything while I'm gone, but I'm back. I can just go back and censor him later. But man, okay. I'm so glad that I'm back. My Firefox, the whole program just completely crapped on me, and now it won't even open. Now I'm in Safari. Safari saves the day. But thank you, Tyler. Where are we at now, man? You talking about? I
was just opining a little more on the issue of focusing on behavior goals and trying to make the right decisions to reach an objective as it relates to scale and weight change and non-linearity of all that sort of thing, as opposed to getting too fixated and being very myopic about what does the scale say today versus yesterday, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think I've got a video called "Your Scale's a Liar," or stop obsessing over the scale, because yeah, I mean, like he's saying, you can lose body fat, significant amount of body fat, and weigh the same because you've increased your lean muscle mass. And a lot of the times this does happen due to hormonal changes on a ketogenic diet. Yeah, this is a crucial part of the puzzle, guys. You got to have patience. You got to have a little mercy on yourself, and don't go running into some extended fast because you think you're not losing body fat quickly enough. It's not a race. Okay. You got anything left on that, Tyler? Since I interrupted.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. It is a race, but it's your race, and I think that's the thing that I would leave you with, is to say it's the race that's set out before you to run. And I think that it's important that you run that race. And if that race takes you 15 years, it takes you 15 years. If it takes you 15 days, it takes you 15 days. All you can be responsible for is to continue to put one foot in front of the other and make progress towards the race that's set out before you. And that's it. And you can get into the what ifs and why not me's and all that kind of stuff, but nothing is going to come from it that's beneficial. It's just going to make you, go visit your friends Ben and Jerry.
Right. And yeah, I guess, and you guys can quote Tyler on this: "You're the only racist that matters."
I believe that's racer, not racist. That's okay.
Racer or racer? Like, what is somebody who is engaged in a race? Is it a racer?
I think
so. I like racist. Let's take the term back.
I think there will be somebody who competes in a lot of races. I don't know.
Okay. Right on.
No worries.
Yeah, this is, you got to come back on sometime, man. It's always fun talking to you, and just out of all the, I got to say, out of all them groups out there on Facebook, the only one that I would recommend that you guys check out would probably be Ketogains. It's hard for me to recommend a lot of these other groups just because you know, the admin, the moderation and the way that they control the content can be a little bit less tight. And yeah, they run a tight ship of Ketogains, but they're very open to me. And make sure you read the FAQ, of course. And but yeah, you guys check out Ketogains. Tyler and Luis, like I said earlier, they do boot camps quite often, and you know, they're very well versed and very knowledgeable in making positive body composition changes. And I know a lot of like people might see pictures of Luis. He's jacked. He's big. Um, he does not take steroids. He's a natural athlete, and I think there's a lot of hyperbole out there on the internet, and you know, I've seen this in a lot of other groups when people, you know, refer to Ketogains or something. They assume that it's just like that they're a bunch of like meatheads or, you know, like unintelligent jocks who just care about how big their biceps are. And I'm gonna say straight up, that's not true, and that's a cop out. You know, I mean, all these people and all these groups have a similar goal and agree on 95% of how to get to that goal. And you know, doing some resistance training can be very beneficial for body composition changes. Now, what type of resistance training, this and that, we can argue till the sun falls out the sky about these things, but in the end, we got to move our bodies, and it's beneficial to strengthen the bodies and to maintain the integrity of your skeletal muscle structure. And it is beneficial to maintain that lean muscle mass. And for a lot of people, it can be beneficial to add a little bit if they've been sedentary for their whole life. And yeah, you know, Ketogains, it's not just a bunch of meatheads. Tyler is not a meathead. No, I'm just kidding. No, Luis ain't a meathead. He's an intelligent guy. He just happens to have been working out for 15 years, and that's what his body looks like as a result. The dude, he's a big guy. He's a big little guy. So Tyler, thank you so much for coming on. 288 pounds down, and what are you at right now? Like 210, you said?
About 215, 216 right now. So yeah.
Right on. So I mean, within the next year, Tyler's going to be in that 100-pound bracket. So congratulations on your work, man. It's truly inspiring. I wish I was able to effectively screen share. Let me try to screen share one more time to show you guys the image that I wanted to show you earlier.
See if Safari can save the day a second time.
Yeah, let's see if Safari steps up to the plate. Let's unzip this file. And it's not Safari's fault. I just don't know how to properly do the screen share in the Google Hangouts, guys. It's my fault. But I'm gonna blame technology. All right, desktop, start screen share. It just trails off into infinity for some reason. Present to everyone. Coming back. All right. How's that, Tyler? Can you see anything, or is it just
doing the trail off to infinity thing again? So yeah.
Yeah. All right. All the stoners out there are like that. Let's see. Let's try one more thing. Photos 1, 2. Start screen share. Now let's see if it'll show. All right. Now I'm going to screen share again. Where is it?
Just faded back to you.
Oops. All right. Let's see. Guys, bear with me. I have nothing entertaining to say while I try to screen share. I'm sorry if you're bored.
Aha.
All right. Well, there's this.
Most offensive shirt on the planet. Yep.
There's him now. Okay. Now, let's see if I can screen share something else. That wasn't the picture I was going for.
That's okay.
Well, it seems my screen share has failed, guys. But I'm going to make that the cover image of this video later on. I'm going to put the cover image as Tyler and his wife both wearing Tyler's old pants. So much body fat that they fit into one of their former pairs of pants. I mean, this image just says it all. The power of the will, the human will, when you really put your mind to it, and the effectiveness long term of a high fat, low carbohydrate ketogenic diet for fat loss. So any closing statements, Tyler? Where can people find you? And do you have any last words for the kind folks that have joined us today and that are going to be watching this in future to come?
Ask not what your country can do for you. I'm kidding.
Make America great again, or I don't know.
Something. No, a couple of things that I would say as far as where they can find me. I mean, Ketogains, I'm there pretty frequently. Go figure. I've got a fairly liberal policy about accepting friend requests, which is basically if you're not crazy, I'll accept you. If you show signs of crazy, I'll just kick you off of my friends list.
That's why we're not friends on Facebook.
With regard to making any substantive life change like this, you've got to be a master, or got to become a master at figuring out why the things that aren't working, and then figuring out a game plan for how to make those changes, and then figuring out how to implement that game plan. So it becomes almost a failure after action report that turns into a strategic vision of what you want, that then becomes tactical. How am I going to do the thing that I want to do? And eating is an extension. Exercise is an extension. Going to therapy is an extension. Going for a walk is an extension. Having a conversation with your spouse or your significant other or your family, those are extensions of the process of getting healthy. And if people will focus on doing those things, I think you'll be surprised how much easier the overall process of getting to a healthy weight and a healthy life is, as opposed to really wanting this before and after picture sort of an existence where there's nothing substantive that happens in the middle. Because if you want
there's the dangers of social media's effect on the human psyche. Everybody's looking for the image. They want the image. And this kind of goes back to what we're talking about, the fasting thing, right? It's like you're going to be doing something so extreme as not eating for an extended period of time. And you're just doing it so you put that social media picture up and humble brag about it. # humble brag. Like, come on, guys. Like, let's get this in perspective. I love it.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, that's it. Nothing too rah-rah. I said I was going to sing Hills Are Alive with the Sound of Music, but I will not do that. So it's all good.
All right. Well, next time we're going to do an entire podcast, all song and dance.
We'll put some lyrics to some public domain music so that YouTube doesn't block your video.
Well, no, you can put copyrighted music in, but you can't monetize the videos now.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, we can use your Katy Perry. It's all good, man.
Nice. All right.
Fireworks. That's how it goes. All right, man. So thanks for coming on. You guys can find more of Tyler, not only in the Ketogains forum, but you can overload him with friends and push him to the limit, because I think there's only like 1,000 or so that you're allowed on Facebook.
I have no idea.
Yeah. Well, maybe you'll see someday.
Just no crazies. If you're crazy, self-filter yourself, because I ain't got time for that. So.
All right.
All right. All right. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you so much for joining, Tyler. You guys can find more content like this at primaledgehealth.com. And don't forget to check out the Ketogenic Edge Cookbook. I've been talking about it in almost every video we made lately because we're so excited to finally have it out. So I want to go ahead and also thank Tyler and the Ketogains crew for so emphatically supporting and recommending the Ketogenic Edge Cookbook. It can be hard to find good, genuine, kind people to collaborate with, and it's the Ketogains crew has just always been dear to my heart. Love you guys. You're doing a great job, and it's been a wild ride getting this book out. So check out the Ketogenic Edge Cookbook, a training manual for low carb, ketogenic, and paleo cuisine. It's far more than just a cookbook. I keep saying that, and I mean it. There are lots of chapters on entire chapter dedicated to just teaching you how to use spices and spice combinations to draw out certain flavors, like bringing out sweeter flavors without even having to add artificial sweeteners or anything like that. It's all the recipes are very simple, but not too simple. And they're all made in our humble little kitchen here in the mountains of Ecuador, just using ingredients that anyone in the flippin' world can find. You know, it's not this crazy gourmet stuff. There is gourmet stuff, and we do talk about how gourmet food is not just about throwing a bunch of fancy ingredients in there. It can really just come down to food quality sometimes. So that's a big theme in there too. So if you're looking to change your lifestyle, if you're looking to become a ketogenic master chef, check out the cookbook that took my wife over a year to make. The true labor of love for our family, the Ketogenic Edge cookbook. It's unlike anything else you're going to find out there. It's only available in ebook format now, but for anybody who's downloaded it, a lot of people have asked me if it's okay if they print it out and bind it. Absolutely, please do. Maybe someday we'll get a physical hard copy of it going, but yeah, we haven't really dealt much with the keto publishing mafia at this point, and we're not trying to go through Amazon. So the only place you can get the Ketogenic Edge cookbook is primaledgehealth.com. And the only Facebook group that I can always send people to and know they're going to be treated respectfully and given sound advice is Ketogains on Facebook. You can also find me on Facebook, find me on Instagram. Everywhere you find me, I'll be called Primal Edge Health. And we do a lot of family-based content as well. It's not just me talking with dudes. We've got some more feminine content coming that Jessica is going to be working on in the coming weeks. And we're excited to bring you guys some more of this content on, you know, raising healthy kids, transitioning your family to a healthy diet and lifestyle, and feminine aspects of health. So thanks for joining us, guys. It's been real. Thanks for joining us and for leading this awesome conversation. Tyler, just go ahead and say something so people can see your pretty face again.
Hi. Bye.
All right, guys. I'll see you next time. Make sure to subscribe. And if you want to get updates, you can actually click the little icon in YouTube at the lower right-hand half of the screen that will turn on reminders. So when I put out content, you will be reminded. You can do the same thing on Facebook as well. You can not only subscribe, but you can follow the page. Or what is it called? Is it called following? I don't even know. I'm bad with the social media stuff, but I'm trying to get better, guys. I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for joining.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.